It happens before you even realize it. You walk toward a baby, you haven't touched them yet, you haven't spoken, you haven't made a sound, and suddenly they cry. Instantly, like something's switched on inside them. And most people assume it's simple. They're scared, they're tired, they just want their mother. But there's a problem with that explanation, because in many cases, nothing physically threatening has happened yet. No touch, no movement, no sudden noise, just presence. Yours. And that raises a strange question. How can a baby react to something that hasn't happened yet? Because the cry often starts before contact, before action, before interaction. Almost like the system is responding to something invisible, something that exists before the world catches up. And once you notice that pattern, it becomes harder to ignore, because it doesn't happen randomly. It happens consistently. Different babies, different environments, same phenomenon. So what are they reacting to? That's where the simple explanations start to fall apart, and something much more complex begins to appear. But to understand it, we need to look at what happens in the brain before interaction even begins. And that's where things start to get unsettling. Most people assume babies react to what they see or feel in the moment. A face, a sound, a touch, something immediate. But infant perception doesn't always work that way. It often starts earlier, much earlier than contact itself, because before a baby fully understands intention, their body is already processing patterns, movement patterns, approach patterns, changes in distance, changes in energy, not in a mystical sense, in a biological one. The nervous system is constantly scanning for predictability, not just what is happening, but what is about to happen. And here's where it gets interesting. When someone approaches a baby, they don't arrive as a single moment. They arrive as a sequence, footsteps, direction, speed, posture, attention. And over time, the brain begins to link those sequences to outcomes. Some approaches lead to comfort, some lead to unpredictability, some lead to overstimulation. And the infant system is designed to learn this extremely fast. So when a new approach begins, the brain doesn't wait for contact. It starts predicting. And sometimes, that prediction alone is enough to trigger a response, a shift in state, a rise in alertness, a cry. Not because something has happened, but because something is being inferred. And that inference is based on accumulated experience. Even if the baby is too young to consciously remember it, it's not memory in words, it's memory in patterns. So when a familiar sequence appears, the system reacts faster. Sometimes even before the conscious moment of recognition would occur, which creates a strange illusion that the baby is reacting to nothing. But in reality, they are reacting to something that has already been partially processed, a prediction, a conclusion, a probability. Now here's where the explanation deepens, because not all approaches are equal. Not all presences feel the same to the nervous system. Some carry calm, some carry instability, some carry inconsistency the baby has learned to anticipate. And the system doesn't wait for proof. It acts on probability, which means the cry can begin before contact if the predicted outcome crosses a certain threshold. Not fear in the adult sense, not reasoning, just regulation imbalance, a system preparing for impact before impact happens. And that leads to a more uncomfortable idea. The baby is not just reacting to people touching them, they are reacting to what interaction has historically meant. And that meaning is stored deeper than thought. It is stored in the body. But even this is still not the full picture, because prediction alone doesn't explain why the reaction is so immediate, or why it sometimes feels almost synchronized with approach. There is another layer underneath it, something that connects perception and emotion in real time. And in the next part, we're going to explore what happens when a baby doesn't just predict presence, but feels it entering their space before contact occurs. There's a moment that adults almost never notice, because from their perspective, nothing has happened yet. No contact, no words, no physical interaction, just distance slowly closing. But for a baby, something is already changing. The environment is no longer static, it is shifting, not visually, not audibly, but relationally. Because when a person approaches a baby, they don't just change position, they change the entire pattern of input the baby is receiving. Light shifts slightly, shadows move, air displacement changes, movement becomes directional, attention becomes focused. And the infant nervous system is constantly tracking all of it, not as separate details, but as one continuous signal. Something is coming closer. And here's where things become more subtle. Because the brain doesn't just register proximity, it registers intent patterns. Is the approach slow or fast? Is it consistent or irregular? Is it familiar or unfamiliar? Is it predictable or not? Over time, these patterns become deeply encoded, and the body begins responding before conscious recognition even forms. This is where the idea of pre-contact reaction becomes important, because the baby is not waiting for touch to understand interaction. They are already processing interaction as it forms. And in that pre-contact phase, the nervous system can shift rapidly, from neutral to alert to overwhelmed, depending on what it predicts is about to happen. And sometimes, that shift is what we see as crying, not caused by touch, not caused by harm, but caused by anticipation of interaction itself. A prediction reaching a threshold the body treats as significant. Now here's where interpretation gets tricky, because from the outside, it looks like the baby is reacting too early, even incorrectly. But from the inside, the system is simply doing its job, trying to reduce uncertainty as quickly as possible. And in early development, uncertainty is not abstract. It is physiological. It affects regulation. It affects stability. It affects safety perception. So, when the system cannot confidently classify what is approaching, it may escalate response early, just to regain control. And that escalation is what we recognize as crying before contact. But there is still something deeper happening underneath this layer, because not all presences trigger the same response. Not all approaches create the same internal shift. Some calm the system, some destabilize it, some feel known before recognition even occurs. And that raises a difficult question. How does the body differentiate before experience fully happens? And in the next part, we're going to look at what researchers think happens when familiarity is stored not in memory, but in the nervous system itself. There's a strange contradiction in early human behavior. Sometimes a baby cries harder when a stranger gets closer, even before anything happens, even before touch, even before clear interaction. And other times, the opposite happens. The baby calms down before any explanation is possible. So what's being detected? It's not identity in the adult sense. It's not, I know this person. It's something earlier than that. Researchers studying early attachment suggest that infants don't just store people as images. They store patterns of interaction. How someone moves, how someone approaches, how someone pauses, how someone responds emotionally in space. And over time, the nervous system begins to build a kind of predictive map, not of faces, but of experiences associated with presence, which means familiarity is not always visual. It can be structural, behavioral, emotional. So when someone enters a baby's space, the brain is not asking, who is this? It is asking something more fundamental. What usually happens when something like this appears? And that question is answered extremely fast, below conscious awareness, below language, below memory, in pure physiological prediction. And that prediction can trigger a response immediately, even before conscious recognition would be possible, which creates a strange effect, a feeling of familiarity or discomfort without clear reason. But in infants, that feeling is not interpreted. It is expressed directly as regulation or dysregulation, calm or crying. Now here's where it becomes more interesting, because this system is not static. It is constantly updating. Every interaction rewrites probability. Every response reshapes expectation. Every outcome adjusts sensitivity, which means the baby is not reacting to a person. They are reacting to a living database of interaction patterns being updated in real time. And that database is extremely sensitive in early life because everything is new, everything is meaningful, everything carries weight. So a slight mismatch, a small deviation, a subtle unpredictability can feel significant to the system, not emotionally, but physiologically. And that may explain why crying can begin before contact, because the system is not reacting to the moment. It is reacting to the prediction of the moment. But there is still another layer, because prediction alone does not fully explain intensity, or why certain presences consistently trigger stronger reactions than others. There is something else being processed, something even more subtle than pattern recognition. And in the next part, we are going to explore the idea that infants may not just detect behavior, but emotional state before behavior even happens. There's something unsettling about how fast a baby can change state. 1 second, neutral. The next, crying. Without clear cause, without touch, without visible trigger. And while it looks sudden, the system inside the baby is not operating in sudden steps. It is continuous, constantly reading, constantly updating. And one of the most important inputs it reads is not behavior. It is state, the emotional condition of the person approaching. Now, not in a mystical way, not as reading thoughts, but as reading signals that correlate with emotional state. Micro movements, posture tension, movement smoothness, approach rhythm, timing inconsistencies. All of these are subtle outputs of the nervous system, even when a person is not aware of them. And infants are highly sensitive to these patterns because they are still learning what emotional states look like in the body. So they don't just learn from words or expressions or touch. They learn from how presence behaves before interaction even begins. And this is where something important happens. If the approaching person is calm, the system tends to stabilize. Movement becomes smoother. Breathing steadies. Engagement opens. But if there is tension, even subtle tension, the system may shift into alertness before any contact occurs. Because to the infant nervous system, emotional state is not abstract. It is environmental data. It changes how predictable the interaction will be. It changes how safe the next moment is likely to feel. And the system is designed to respond early, very early. Now here's the key: require conscious understanding. The baby is not thinking any of this. It is happening underneath thought, as regulation, as physiology, as survival level processing, which means crying can emerge as a direct output of inferred state, not actual event, a response to uncertainty in emotional prediction, not to contact itself. But there is still something deeper. Because emotional state is only part of the signal, there is also direction of attention, where it is focused, how stable it is, whether it is fragmented or centered, and infants are extremely sensitive to that too. Because attention determines predictability, and predictability determines safety. So when attention feels unstable, the system may escalate response even faster. And that leads to a difficult conclusion. The baby is not reacting to what you do. They are reacting to what your presence indicates will happen next. A prediction built from extremely subtle cues, processed in real time, without words, without explanation. But even this is still not the final layer, because all of this assumes the baby is reacting to external signals only. But researchers have also considered something more complex. What happens when internal expectation alone is enough to trigger response? When the brain predicts so strongly that the body reacts before any external confirmation exists at all. And in the final part, we are going to bring everything together and explore the most uncomfortable idea in this episode, that sometimes the baby is not reacting to you at all, but to the idea of you forming inside their prediction system. At this point, something should feel slightly off, because the timeline no longer makes sense. You approach, but the baby reacts before anything actually happens. No touch, no clear trigger, no visible cause, and yet the response is real, immediate, unmistakable. So where does it come from? To answer that, we have to accept one uncomfortable idea. The brain does not wait for reality. It predicts it. And in early development, those predictions are not weak. They are powerful, dominant, sometimes strong enough to trigger a full-body response on their own, which means the baby is not always reacting to what is happening. They are reacting to what their system believes is about to happen. And when that belief crosses a certain threshold, the body responds as if it's already real. So the cry that begins before contact may not be caused by you touching them. It may be caused by a completed prediction inside their brain, a pattern recognized, an outcome expected, a state prepared for. And once that state activates, the body doesn't wait, it reacts. Now here's where everything connects: the approach, the movement, the subtle emotional cues, the stored interaction patterns, the internal prediction system. All of it feeds into one continuous process: what is about to happen? And sometimes that question is answered too quickly, before the world confirms it, before reality catches up, which creates the illusion that the baby is reacting for no reason. But there is always a reason. It's just not happening where we can see it. And this leads to the final shift in perspective. A baby is not simply experiencing the world as it unfolds. They are actively constructing expectations about it, constantly, relentlessly. And those expectations don't stay in the mind. They move into the body, into regulation, into emotion. So when the cry comes early, it is not premature. It is precise, a response to a predicted reality that feels real enough to act on. And that means something important. The baby is not just learning from what happens. They are learning from what they believe will happen. And over time, those predictions become patterns. Those patterns become expectations. Those expectations become the foundation of how they experience people. So the next time it happens, when a baby begins to cry before you even touch them, it may not be fear of you. It may not be rejection. It may be something much deeper, a system trying to stay ahead of the world before the world arrives. And in that moment, you are not just interacting with a child. You are interacting with a mind that is already trying to predict you,